they need to be legally treated just like the Jews in Corinth, and he allows them the freedom to practice their faith. It's a significant development there. Paul's in a much different situation now. He's in prison, and we know eventually how Paul ends. I made a comment last week about how in the Gospel or in Acts, Luke shows Paul as a symbol of Jesus. Not in terms of this, especially in terms of the last half of the book of Acts. I know we're not going to go into the book of Acts, but there's a trial that Paul goes through. He's shipwrecked. Now that's a symbol of death. He's shipwrecked, but he doesn't die. And he eventually goes to Rome. In the book of Acts, how does it close? He's there teaching and preaching the kingdom of God. That's how the Gospel of Luke ends. With Jesus, he's on trial, he dies, but he's raised again, and he's teaching the apostles concerning his kingdom before his ascension. So there's just a lot going on in this part of the book, and hopefully that's some helpful information as you when you read these texts. The writers they're very skilled, they're thoughtful. This is not like a rough draft. There's a lot of care when you read these texts. There's a lot of care, a tremendous amount of care that went in to the development of them. So some of the features here that Luke shows us about the crucifixion in chapter 23. So, and we know about Pilate, but here Luke, he goes into Jesus being brought before Herod Antipas. What do we know about Herod Antipas? He's shown up a couple times in the ministry of Jesus. Luke shows him a couple of times. What impression do you have about what he thinks about Jesus?
He's the one that had John beheaded, right?
He did?
He was interested in hearing his teaching, but he didn't want to follow.
Mm-hmm.
We know that.
Yeah, he has some close dealings with the ministry. You mentioned John, and I don't know that John and Herod, I wouldn't describe them as friends. Sometimes that's kind of how we describe them. Herod seems to be interested in John, and I think the interest of a lot of the leaders, Pilate as well, I think what we would consider friendliness is probably more ambivalence. There might be some curiosity there, but it's nothing more than that. So yeah, we've seen Herod there. He has Jesus' cousin, the one that Jesus would say was the greatest of all the prophets, beheaded. We won't go into that whole ordeal. Herod is put in a difficult position. So that's one instance. What else do we know about Herod? His impressions of Jesus.
Works magic or something. It says in verse 8 he wanted to see him do a sign.
Yeah, he wanted to see him do a sign. It's all. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't want to see that? I think even the Pharisees went out to see John, right? And then they come to see Jesus, and even the strongest opponent, I think, would just out of curiosity would want to see what can he really do? And so Herod's interested in that. Perhaps that's as far as it goes. Now, I mean, when has anything like this happened in Herod's jurisdiction? These are strange and unusual times for these people. There's nothing normal about what's gone on for the last 3 years. And, Jesus was told, I think back in 15 or 16, that Herod wanted to see him. Remember the Pharisees Herod wants to see you. And he refers to Herod as a fox. So Jesus knows, Herod's political figure. He's not the woman at the well. Okay, but here Luke goes into some detail about this dealing with him at the trial. So in verse 6, it says that when Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself at Jerusalem at the time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him, and was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. The chief priests and scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. And Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that day, for before this they had been at enmity with each other. So, if it's curiosity, Herod is left disappointed. He deals with him for a while, but he gets nothing out of Jesus. Just no response. It seems sort of like a rather chaotic scene. And as these accusations are being made, and Jesus is being mocked, and somewhere along the line, from my perspective at least, somewhere along the line in this whole thing, Herod realizes how he can use Jesus. He can use him to make nice with Pilate, because that's what Herod Antipas cares about. These political relationships. That's how Herod is able to stay in power and do what he does. And if there had been some falling out with the Roman authority, here's an opportunity for us to make nice. And so Herod certainly isn't going to, do anything that he thinks that Pilate wouldn't have gone along with. So he just uses Jesus for his own political purposes. But once again, Luke is showing Herod doesn't really have a problem with him. So Pilate's not, right? So you have this Roman ruler, the Herod dynasty. Of course, they're this strange ruling class that's sort of an intermediate between the Romans and the Jews, and they don't seem to have a problem with him. So again, it's showing sort of these legal reactions to Jesus, in spite of the Jews, how they treat him. So they treat him as a king, or they mock him as a king, and again, there's a lot of symbolism in that. Jesus is a king, but he's a king of a different kind, and that is, that's the really the theological pinnings of this whole thing. Jesus claimed to be a king. Now, as far as the apostles are concerned, they see this start to unfold. It's all falling apart. It's all falling apart, and their hopes and dreams are just being laughed at as he's now being mocked and going to be paraded through as a king, in such a humiliating fashion. Anything else about Herod?
Oh, this is going to be really weird, but I'm thinking of separation of church and state. I mean, how it all is messed up, because if the religious people had just taken care of the religious and not tried to do with the political, right? I mean,
I guess.
He let his wife tell him what to do. He watched Pilate.
Yeah, it's just a big. It's a big mess.
It's a big mess.
Yeah.
The church wasn't taking. The Israelites were not taking care of their own issues.
Right, and they were limited in what they could do. They want to kill Jesus, but they don't have the authority to do that. They're able to just sort of deal with, I guess, probably what we would call civil matters, and talking about the separation of church and state, that whole thing, that goes back to the 1500s in the Middle Ages, and that's not There's,
Oh, no,
there's,
I know.
yeah, but like there is no such construction or thinking of that at this point. But anyhow, it is a big mess, and ultimately it's going to lead to his unjust death.
You know, verse 12, Christ calls Pilate and Herod to become friends.
Yeah,
They didn't like each other before this, and now since Christ has come along, and they've got a common dislike for Christ, now that they become friends.
yeah. There's a lot that's really backwards about this whole thing, and Herod just uses him. He uses him to serve some political purpose. If we keep reading, of course, now he goes back to Pilate, and again, this is where Pilate tries to spare Jesus and appease the mob, to appease the Jews, to no avail. Pilate's in a difficult position. His concern is just, law and order, and this is a very, very busy time in Jerusalem. A lot of people there from out of town. It's an unusual time, and you just want things to run smoothly, and that's all Pilate really seems to want. The Romans being so quick to crucify people, he doesn't just immediately jump to that point. He tries to be reasonable, but he's dealing with a mob, and at the end he just feels that it's going to appease everybody if Jesus should be crucified. So eventually, of course, he just gives in to the pressure. In 26, Jesus he's going to be paraded through the streets again, in a very different fashion than he was, I think it was 2 weeks earlier. So you can just imagine how he's been dressed, this crown of thorns, a reed for a scepter, this robe. He's been scourged, which you all have been told about that. I'm sure that it's amazing that he survived that, because plenty of people wouldn't have lived through that kind of beating. But he's still living. He's clinging to life, and they're going to parade him through the streets. In 26, it says, as they led him away, they seized one Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and laid on him the cross to carry behind Jesus. And there followed him a great multitude of people, and of women, who were mourning and lamenting for him. But turning to them, Jesus says, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and on the hills, cover us. For if they do these things, when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? Again, you have to be impressed with the details that Luke gives here. And if you remember back to the beginning, we said that Luke, he's giving us an eyewitness account. Did he talk to some of these women? Perhaps he did. How does he wasn't there watching this. Luke was not in Jerusalem when this happened. Matter of fact, there's only one of the apostles who witnessed the crucifixion. It was John. John was the only one who was an eyewitness of the death of Jesus. And so, he had to have spoken to some people to be able to put such a detailed account here. Simon of Cyrene carrying the cross of Jesus. You can read about Simon of Cyrene. He's a man from Africa. And he's the one that carries the cross. Why include a detail like that? A name and the place where the man's from. Is Luke perhaps, again, this Gentile perspective showing us that Jesus is dying for everybody. He's dying for the world, for the sins of the world. And you have a representative of even Africa here, as Simon is carrying this cross. What do you think of what Jesus says to the women?
It's going to get worse before it gets better. I think he's maybe alluding to 80-70
Mm-hmm.
in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instruction direction.
Yeah. Anything else?
It's a really random thing to say while you're being drug off to your death.
Seems that way, doesn't it? Yeah. A random thing, and that's why I say it's really something that's the detail of that is given. It's not just this consolation that he tries to give to them, or he's saying something here. I think he does. I think it is. It's and I think it's back in chapter 17 we didn't get to, where Jesus talks about Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, and that's in the future. Not only that, but even in what's going to happen in those opening chapters of the book of Acts, there's persecution is going to come to the believers of Jesus. These women are believers. They're not happy about what's going on. They're mourning for him, and so it's going to get worse. It kind of reminds me of early in our study, in the beginning of the ministry, when they're asking him, well, how come John's disciples fasted? And Jesus says that, well, it's not time to fast. It's time to celebrate. There will be time for fasting and mourning later. And it would seem that, well, that time has arrived. Jesus is, in the Gospels, especially John, he is very aware of the timing of things. And this is a very, very different scene than Jesus turning water to wine at a celebration at a wedding. A very, very different situation here. Anything else about this? Again, Luke is the one who tells us about these women, this scene here.
And that word blessed, since we're studying the Beatitudes, blessed was important. Isn't it interesting that he's saying you're going to be blessed? It'd be better to be born barren, never have children. What's that all about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
well, that language, I think, comes in reference to when Jerusalem is going to be destroyed.
right.
Because he warns them about, here's what to look for when this happens. You need to leave. And
Do you think there was any that he was saying, God, he was so sad that he had created man again that it had come to something like this? Or his people and what they did, and you, when you have children,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, that's when you try to get into the mindset. What was the mindset of Jesus? And I absolutely think there is an overwhelming sense of sorrow because of why this has to happen. You get a sense of it when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. He goes to the tomb and Jesus weeps. And often, we'll look to that and we'll say, oh, Jesus is just like us. His friend has died and he's mourning because his friend has died. And well, no, Luke's not trying to show us that Jesus is just like us, right? He's not weeping because his friend had died. He's weeping because the people there don't believe he can do anything about it. And that's what has precipitated this whole event, and history is all coming to a head. The rejection is not just what he has encountered recently. The rejection goes back a long time, doesn't it? It goes back to the garden. And the weight of all of that is all going to be placed on his shoulders. And so I struggle to grasp that. You probably do too. What is his emotional state here? Certainly we can focus on physical pain, you know, that's undeniable. But there is I would say, a heavier burden here that he's carrying. He's carrying the burden of the sins of the world, and that had to be horrific. It had to be horrific. And maybe the sense of that horror we get from looking at, you know, what he experienced and endured physically, to try to tell us about something worse that he was carrying. And that's certainly in keeping with the miracles show. The miracles are an outward demonstration of what he can do inwardly for us in forgiving our sins. So that's a good question, Cindy. Anything else about that?
Is it him just sharing who he is again? Because he says, you know, he turned, they were following him, and it wasn't just the women.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you know, don't weep for me.
Mm-hmm.
You have more coming.
Yeah.
I will be relieved, you know, to a different place, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and certainly, I don't think those women would have forgotten what he said. And then in seeing things that would happen later, it's further confirmation of who he said he was. David?
I like the fact that you pointed out that it hurted him to bring him to tears because they doubted. It's unfortunate. We still doubt today.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing when we're going through our storms, the same God that spoke during the day, why don't you believe when you face in the dark?
Mm-hmm.
He still hurt.
Yeah.
Reading the Bible, studying the Bible. But when you go through, what happens? Your faith wavers. And as Christians, it should.
Mm-hmm.
Stand on what you read. Believe what you read. What good is it to study the Bible, to come to church, but when a storm arrives, you feel like your life is falling apart?
Yeah.
Not when God is involved.
Mm-hmm.
Satan wants us to feel like our lives are falling apart. Yes, how God sees it. It's falling in place. Now, sometimes the storm has to come, not to destroy, but to deliver. Some storms come to help you get right, not to take you out.
Well, and that's what this storm is all about.
Absolutely.
That's what this storm is all about. Yeah. And in Luke, that's what he shows us over and over. These two different reactions, two different ways people receive Jesus. They either reject him or they trust him. And I think Elizabeth was telling me the other day that she came across there's two times in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus is amazed. Do I amaze Jesus? Two times he was amazed. One time he was amazed at the centurion because of the great faith that he had. The other time he was amazed because of the disbelief of the people. So there may be a sermon coming in the future about that. I thought, what great bookends, right? And so where do we fall in like
Talking about bookends, you said that Jesus was presenting a second Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought it was interesting that he said he earnestly sought to eat the last Passover with the disciples. It wasn't because he wanted to eat with them. It was because it was the last Passover under the old law and its effect. And it's kind of speaking of bookends. It was the Passover is the bookends of the application of the law from Exodus to the last Passover that Jesus observed.
Yeah, it's that transition, and then you have the totality of the record of sin recorded by the law is put on him, nailed to the cross. He's canceled. Paul's the one who gives us this language to describe what happened. Anything else before we move on here? Theology lesson from a thief. A theology lesson from a thief. This is great, right? This is the other accounts, they'll talk about how Jesus was crucified alongside thieves. But Luke records this conversation. And it's significant, of course. So in 32, two others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And they cast lots to divide his garments. And the people stood by, watching by the rulers, but the rulers scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he's the Christ of God, his chosen one." Soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly, I say to you today, you will be with me in paradise." So if we go back to 32, these criminals are described. Their placement is described. And Luke tells us in 34, these words of Jesus, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That speaks volumes about what is in this man's heart, what he's made of, what he's about. Even as he's being treated like this, he has the thought of love and forgiveness on behalf of the people who are nailing him to a cross. This is what he wants, even for the ones killing him, to be forgiven. Now, we talked about forgiveness briefly when we looked at chapter 17, and here is the model. Do we have this kind of heart? I don't know that any of us do. This is the model. It's the example that we are to follow. That's his request. That's his desire. That's why he's going through what he's going through. Because as we've seen throughout this book, he is about salvation, not condemnation. He is about life, not death. He is not bent on destruction, but on salvation and forgiveness. And you see that to the very end of his life. So the scene is described here to us. Just a horrible, horrible thing. And we know that, there are some followers who are watching this. Some of the women are watching this scene unfold. And there's nothing dignified about this. I don't know what a typical crucifixion was like, but there is just not any dignity in this to the bitter end. These people standing around watching this horror. I don't know if any of us could watch this. But this is common to their world. These people have seen crucifixion, have seen many crucifixions. The violence of the ancient world is hard for us to imagine. But there they are, mocking him. It's not enough. It's not enough for them that he's hanging there about to die. They're going to yell and mock him to the bitter end. And then you have this discussion between these two thieves. And the one, there is, he joins the crowd. He joins in with the crowd, but still hedges, right? He still hedges because, he's just selfish. There's a contrast that Luke is showing us. And this is the contrast that Luke has shown us throughout the gospel. And this contrast is represented by these two thieves. The other, though, is very different. The other one is very, very different. But he says, "Do you not fear God? Do you not fear God?" They're about to meet God. That's what's happening, and I mean, they're hanging. Don't you fear God? Are there more pressing concerns on your mind than joining in with the mob and yelling at this man? And he says that we're under a sentence of condemnation. There is no denying the guilt of these two men. This thief, he knows that we're under a sentence of condemnation, and we're deserving of it. And here it's the thief. He's preaching the gospel. He doesn't even know it. He's preaching. The world, you and I, we're under this sentence of death because of our sin, justly condemned. But Jesus is going to undo all of it. He's going to reverse it. He's going to bring mercy, pardon, justification. Those are all terms that have a legal framework behind them. That's the way Paul describes what happens at the cross of Jesus, and what is accomplished and provided for the sins of the world. And of course, how do you receive that? How do you receive mercy and pardon and forgiveness and renewal and hope and all of the goodness that God wants to pour into our lives through Jesus? You've got to believe. You got one thief who doesn't and the other who does. And that's, in my mind, is the significance of the contrast that Luke sets up in recording this to us. Here's two paths you can take. Both paths, and everybody's going to die. Everybody's going to die. What's going to make the difference in death? Well, it surely isn't the one who's railing at Jesus on the cross. I mean, you can leave the world kicking and screaming. It's not going to change. Not going to change the fact you're going to meet your Maker. What makes the difference for us is our faith in Jesus, and that's what this other man has. He knows exactly who he is, and in looking at Jesus, he knows his only hope is in that man. So, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Do you have any reactions, any thoughts about the contrast of these two men? Again, this discussion is unique to the Gospel of Luke here.
Yeah, these two represent mankind from Adam all the way up to us. Those who accept Jesus, those who don't, and then, of course, the one and only Savior in the middle. You said, everybody's going to face death. The question is, how much time will we spend with Jesus? Is it just the judgment, or is it eternity? I mean,
Yeah.
The old saying goes, there is no atheist on Judgment Day. Every knee will bow.
Yeah.
But it's just how long will that time be?
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective.
One's
Yeah.
focusing on physical, one's on spiritual.
Say that again.
One's focusing on the physical now, and one's focusing on spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The one who makes the request, he's thinking about his future. He knows that there is more to his existence than what was happening in that moment.
If Luke only knew the lengths at which we would debate this story for reasons that have nothing to do with why Luke's recording.
Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? We don't. I think there's some people who wish it wasn't there. It would make things easier for them. They think, and all that arguing and debating, you miss the point. We're the ones that miss out. Verse 44, we've got the death of Jesus is reported here. It says, it was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sunlight failed. And the centurion of the temple, or the curtain of the temple, was torn in two. And Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had taken place, he, praising God, said, "Certainly this man was innocent." And all the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home, beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance, watching those things. So he dies, and again, Luke he gives these specific details. He tells us the time of the day when it occurred. What's the significance of the temple, the curtain of the temple being torn in two?
Separation, God.
What separation?
Holy and non-holy.
Okay, so you think that the veil of the temple, it separates the priests from, well, the presence of God.
What was it, when the, thing of the old law and the new law going into effect?
Yes, that's all changing. It's all changing, and so now there's access. There's access through the cross of Christ. Talk about that more here this morning.
In another account, it says it was torn from top to bottom, which is significant because the only way men could have torn it would have been from the bottom to the top. It was vertical. That was God's doing.
Yeah, that sends a message. That gets people's attention. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it symbolizes renewed access to Christ now and to God.
Yeah.
Personally, instead of going to the Holy of Holies once a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Christ is our mediator. Christ is the one who gives us access. He's the one who, well, in his ministry, he's the one that makes the introductions, to put it that way. And Jesus, what he says here is, this Father, into your hands I commit my spirit, is significant in that you find Jesus dying with faith. He is going to die with the faith and hope that his Father is going to glorify him. Luke doesn't go into all of that as is recorded in other places. You can read John 17 sometime, the prayer of Jesus before his death, and that's what he's asking for and believes is going to happen. So here it's been said, Jesus, he does two things for us. He shows us how to live and he shows us how to die. He dies in complete trust of his Father, and that his Father is going to keep his promise, and that's the way that we can die through our faith in Christ. This soldier, the centurion, certainly this man was innocent, is the declaration that Luke records. In other accounts, the centurion says, "Truly, this was the Son of God." So those details are somewhat different. But it's significant that it's a Roman who's making this declaration. And that's the importance of it. In the Roman world, the Son of God was who? It was Caesar. It's on their coinage. That was what was announced when Caesar was born. Son of God. All of that is attached to Jesus, and you have a Roman doing it. Roman making a declaration this man was innocent. That would say that his death was unjust. And we understand the significance of him being innocent. This is why he is able to be the sacrifice for the sins of the world. Then you have these women who are there, who are witnessing this. You have others they're returning home, beating their breasts, and that's signifying their sadness. So you have believers and followers who follow him through the streets to where he's there and crucified, up into the very end. And here's the mourning. Here's the mourning that's taking place. The crowds they leave in sorrow. And eventually, here we're told about the rest of the chapter. It tells us about Joseph of Arimathea, who is going to bury Jesus in his family tomb, and that's where he's going to be until God does something that's completely unexpected and surprising. and we'll talk about the resurrection on Wednesday. Any other thoughts or questions, comments you want to make about the crucifixion?
Interesting that Jesus quotes Psalms a couple times. We often talk about the Psalm 22 quotation.
Mm-hmm.
My God, why have you forsaken me? But this, into your hands I commit my spirit, from Psalm 31. Interesting how Jesus keeps quoting the Psalms on the cross.
Yeah, and it, when you see that happening, it begs further investigation. Go back to those places. He's drawing attention to those places. Read the 22nd Psalm. It's significant in the events that are happening in terms of both his death and his resurrection. Maybe you've had studies about the last words of Jesus. There are these sayings that are recorded that have a lot of meaning. Dying men don't waste their words. They speak what weighs most heavily on their hearts. All right, well, thank you for being here. Appreciate your participation today. We'll see you on Wednesday.
I said that, but I meant that too.
Appreciate your sermon.
Thank you.
I don't ever get around to talk to you after.
That went the wrong way.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Did you get Jimmy, that's neat.
Yeah.
Well, that's fun.
I was like,
It messes with, it does. I was like, check that out again. Like my students didn't believe me. That's what. Yeah. Yeah, it was in the. On Friday.
Bring back.
Thank
Have to be executed by criminals. Was that? I mean, I've never read anything like that.
That's the path. That's the legal path for that.
Right.
There are a lot of women who are very.
For other crimes, would they?
They don't think that we.
Would they engage the Romans to do the same thing?
I don't know. Again, that's the legal pathway. But the other thing that is always overlooked is that you have to mind. It's all laid out.
I'm good. How are you doing?
We're making it one day at a time.
Yeah. The older we get,
Oh, the old law.
the more we get scared of this.
Well, they created a legal framework to basically make that impossible because of the sacredness through which they understood life. They didn't have that. So, that's kind of it. That's all.
I was just thinking
Forgot
about that
about.
from a perspective, if that was a common practice, then this was just the next gap.
Yeah.
But I would say.
Violence reaction is not that, is it?
That's right, that's not that.
Yeah, this is unusual.
So this is unusual, yeah. And,
But it says, what is the Bible says that it was for envy?
yeah,
Yeah. These men were they were beyond reason.
Yeah.
They're not thinking about what they're doing or the